In this lesson, we're going to take a deep dive into focus stacking out in the field. What are the best settings in camera and some tips and tricks whilst out in the field to get razor sharp images from the near foreground all the way to the far background. Now, because this is a little bit more complicated, I have split it up into two sections. Today, we're out in the field learning all the in-camera settings. Then the last module inside of this course, we're going to go through the tips and tricks in post-production. Now, I have given you additional images for the post-production technique. I'm also going to include all these raw images today, so you can practice with me one-on-one in the editing tutorial, and then outside of the editing tutorial, you can play around with these images in post-production. Therefore, before you go out and take your own images, you know exactly what to do out in the field from today's lesson, then in the last module, exactly what to do in post-production. Now, in today's lesson, we've got our tripod in a very awkward position, hanging upside down because we're focusing on this really big mushroom here. Now, if I was just to focus on this mushroom, everything in the far background would be blurry. In today's lesson, I want to explain to you how we can get razor sharp images from the very foreground of this mushroom to the midground of the rocks and to the trees in the far background by taking multiple images. Now, this will depend a lot on the camera gear you have, because I have a lens that will focus within about 25 to 30 centimeters of the near subject. So you have to find out what your lens will focus, the minimum focusing distance, because this will apply to how close you can get out in the field to your subject. Now, I am also using a wide angle lens to emphasize the foreground and also emphasize the background. This is a little tip. The wider you shoot, as I said, it's easier to focus, easier for exposure, and also when we're focus stacking out in the field, as you'll see today, it emphasizes the size of this mushroom. So I've gone through and hung my camera upside down, and what I'm also trying to do is get a little bit of angle tilted on the actual lens and camera. What this will do is segregate the foreground and the background and make them look a little bit closer than what they are, which is what we're trying to achieve out in the field. So now we want to go through and understand the settings that we're going to use in our nature focus stacking photography. We want to apply very similar settings to that 160 ISO. And here, we're not going to shoot definitely at f8. We might actually boost it up to f11. We're going to find that out very shortly. A couple of more things that I want to go through and lock down in camera is the white balance. Because we're going to take multiple images from foreground to midground and background, as I said, we don't want our white balance to change in between that. So we're just going to go through and lock down that white balance. I'm going to set mine for a daytime temperature. So I know when I take that images all the way through, bring them into post-production for you guys, they're going to be all the same color, which is what we're after. Now I want to have a look on the back of the screen, and I want to go to the closest focusing point. Now for me, I always start near and work my way back. This is just something I do, and this will differ if you do have external lighting. So I've come into a little bit of a forest here because it's going to eliminate those really high highlights and dark shadows. We've got a pretty neutral, overcast sort of day here, very good exposure. So I want to go all the way down and focus on the nearest point to me there, and then I'm actually going to go through and just hit autofocus. Now, because I have focus peaking on my camera, I can see that this is in foreground focus and also how far back the focusing goes. Now this is at f8. I can actually bump this up to f11 and it's going to increase that depth of field. So I'm going to shoot actually this image at f11, because if we were to shoot at f8, we might get halfway through the mushroom, then the next image get to the rock, then to the foreground, then to the background. But if we shoot at f11, I can now get the whole mushroom in focus. So there's one image, another image focused on the midground and background. So we're actually eliminating what we have to do in post-production. So that's going to make sense as we go through this tutorial. So 160 ISO, now shooting at f11 rather than f8 to expand that depth of field. We've locked down our white balance, so we know when we change through this, it's not going to change as we take multiple images, very similar to the panoramic that we've taken earlier. So we're going to go through and put a 2-second timer, and it's going to give me 1.5 of a shutter speed, and my histogram is reading out very well. So I'm going to push that, it's going to give a 2-second timer and capture that image. Now, before we go and change our focusing point, I want to give you one pro tip on how to help you out in post-production. I'm going to go through and point on the camera where my focusing point was. I'm going to take another image exactly the same. So it's captured that image, and you're probably wondering why I'm doing that. Because we're taking multiple images, when we put it into post-production in Lightroom, they're going to look extremely similar. Especially on the bottom, the thumbnail will look really, really small, and we might actually delete images that we need. So if we take an image, put our finger there, and now we can move to the next focusing point. After that, we'll take another image with our finger on there also. So I'm actually going to go into the playback, and what I want to do is go back to the image without my finger in it and zoom up and find out where my focusing is, because we don't want to fully trust focus peaking. So I can tell right now the beginning of the mushroom just here is really sharp, but actually the back of the mushroom, where the focus peaking did tell me it was in focus, isn't fully sharp. So we're going to go and focus on the back of the mushroom now. So we just have to remember we went from f8 to f11. If I went to f8, I might have to do 1, 2, 3, 4 images at f8. We want to expand that depth of field. But remember, in the aperture module, very, very early on, we spoke about going to f22. Yes, it's going to give us a really big depth of focus, but we're going to get really negative effects. We want to stick around that f8 to f11. So once again, I'm going to focus on the back of this tree, on the back of this mushroom here, and I can tell a lot more comes in focus. We're going to take another image with a 2-second timer on, and we've captured that image. Now straight away, I'm going to put my finger once again on where I was focusing and capture that another image. So we now have 2 images, but only this near foreground is in focus. So what I want to do now is look where my focus peaking sort of eliminates, and it's telling me it's eliminating about just here. So what I'm going to do, just to be safe, this is pro tip number 2 in focus stacking. So the first one is putting our finger there. The second one is we're better to shoot too many images than not enough. It's the same as a panoramic. Shoot too many images than not enough. Now, there is obviously a limit. We don't want to shoot 50 images because it's going to make our post-production time a hassle, very, very big hassle. So just to be safe, I'm going to focus on this rock just here. So I'm going to go up another 2 steps, and as soon as I focus on that rock, I can tell a lot of this foreground, mid-ground area, not as far as the trees, but just sort of this mid-ground area here is a lot more in focus. So I'm going to go through once again and catch that with a 2-second timer for our third image. Then we're going to go through and put our finger once again to capture this image, to take it into post-production. Now I'm just going to keep repeating this all the way so I get enough images. The next image I'm going to do is just that rock just there. Another 2-second timer to catch that image for our fourth image now. And once again to repeat that, just to give that pro tip, put my finger there. Now I'm actually going to take a 5th image. I personally don't think I need to, because it is showing in the background that those trees are lit up. But just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go all the way to the far, far tree in the background and focus on that. And it is telling me from the bar down the bottom that I am focusing to infinity now. So a lot more is in focus. So I'm going to catch that 5th image just to make sure. So let's say we shot at that f8 or f7.1. We might have to shoot 6 or 7 images. That means more post-production time, or it means more mistakes could be made in camera. So if we want to try and eliminate post-production time and also eliminate those mistakes. So once again, I'm just going to point to the sky and capture that image. So you can see now I have got 5 images for focus stacking. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the far, far background. Now, if we want to be a little bit more precise, especially if I want to print this image, I would probably go through and focus on the foreground of the mushroom, the middle of the mushroom, and also the back of the mushroom. And the reason I would do this is because the mushroom actually goes like this. So we have to remember that f11, because we are focusing so close, we want to make sure that center of the mushroom is really, really sharp. So what I'm actually going to do is just to go back into my playback and find the images where I was focusing on the mushroom, and I want to go to the far background one of the mushroom. And here I'm just going to check what it looks like in the background. And you can see when I zoom up to 100%, how much of it is in focus and how much of it isn't. And I can tell right now I have overlapped those focusing points, which is really, really important. So just to recap, we want to lock down our ISO to the lowest or whatever suits our conditions. We want to try and shoot on the higher end of that f11, or if you are using a full frame camera, f13, maybe f16, depending on the lens that you are using. Very, very important to lock down that white balance. So for me, daylight. Pro tip number 1, point after taking one image. Pro tip number 2, maybe take 1 or 2 extra images that you don't think you'll need, because you can always delete them later. But the more you shoot and the more you focus stack, the more you'll understand each lens. That is the number 3 tip I can give you. Each lens will be very different, and also if you're using telephoto and wide angle. But this is how to shoot focus stacking to get the best possible results out in the field. Now, in the last module, I'm going to go through how to blend these images together.